The sun was just starting to peek over the tall, fancy houses when Alex flipped a switch. Far away, near Barbara's giant mansion, something big was happening. Not a noisy, crashing kind of big, but a quiet, sneaky kind of big. The water in the huge, beautiful lake, the one everyone loved, began to drop. Slowly, like a bathtub draining, the water level went down, down, down. It pulled away from the fancy docks where expensive boats usually floated. It pulled away from the perfectly green lawns that sloped down to the shore. And most importantly, it pulled away from the sandy edges around Barbara's magnificent $8 million home, a house that looked like it belonged in a movie. She loved showing it off, especially how it sat right on the water, with its own little beach. But now, that water was disappearing, leaving behind wet, squishy mud and rocks that used to be hidden deep below. Soon, the fancy boats were resting sadly on the squishy mud, looking like giant, sleepy fish that had been left on the dry land. The once sparkling lake, the heart of their perfect neighborhood, was shrinking, turning into a muddy mess. Alex watched from a distance, a strange mix of worry and a little bit of satisfaction bubbling inside him. He knew what he had done. He knew it was huge. But he also knew why he had done it. And as the morning light grew brighter, soon someone, probably Barbara herself, was going to wake up and see that the lake was gone. What would happen then? Would they figure out who did it? Alex held his breath, waiting for the screams to start. Life in the Willow Creek neighborhood used to be a dream. It was a place filled with sunshine, friendly waves from neighbors, and the happy sounds of kids playing. Alex, a kind and quiet man who loved to build things with his hands, had lived there for years. His house wasn't the biggest, but it was cozy and just right for him and his sweet dog, Gus. Gus, a fluffy golden retriever, loved to chase squirrels in the yard and beg for belly rubs. Alex spent most of his free time in his backyard, which was a little slice of heaven. A small, clear creek, sparkling with tiny fish, ran right through it, making a gentle gurgling sound that was music to his ears. This creek wasn't just pretty, it was special. It connected to a larger stream, which eventually flowed into the big Willow Creek Lake, the very same lake that touched Barbara's grand mansion. Alex had built something truly wonderful over his part of the creek, a sturdy, charming wooden footbridge. He had spent weeks on it, choosing every piece of wood carefully, smoothing it down until it was soft to the touch. He painted it a cheerful robin's egg blue, and on sunny mornings, butterflies would sometimes land on its railing, their wings fluttering like tiny stained glass windows. The bridge wasn't just for looks. It led to a small, secret garden on the other side of the creek, where Alex grew colorful flowers and juicy tomatoes. Gus loved the bridge too, trotting across it with a happy wag of his tail, sometimes stopping to peer into the water at the little fish. It was a place of peace, a symbol of Alex's love for his home and the quiet beauty around him. Neighbors would often stop by, admiring the bridge and telling Alex how lovely it was. He would always offer them a cup of lemonade and a friendly chat, sharing stories about Gus or his latest gardening adventures. Alex believed in being a good neighbor, helping out whenever he could, and always offering a kind word. He loved how everyone in Willow Creek seemed to share this idea of a friendly, caring community. For a long time, the Homeowners Association, or HOA, was just a group of people who made sure the grass was cut and the streetlights worked. They sent out polite newsletters about community events, like summer picnics in the park or holiday decorating contests. Alex never really paid much attention to them. As long as his garden was growing and Gus was happy, he was content. The HOA rule seemed simple enough: keep your lawn neat, don't paint your house neon green, and be respectful of others. Everyone in Willow Creek seemed to follow these rules without much fuss, because they all wanted a nice place to live. But then, things started to change. A new group of people joined the HOA board, and they seemed to have different ideas about what perfect meant. They started sending out more letters, not about picnics, but about very tiny rules. Like, your mailbox is 1 inch too short. Or, your flower pots are the wrong color. Alex chuckled at first. It seemed silly. But then the letters started coming more often, and they didn't feel so silly anymore. They felt bossy. One sunny afternoon, as Alex was watering his prize-winning sunflowers, a very fancy car pulled up to his curb. The window rolled down, and there sat Barbara, the lady from the $8 million mansion. She wore sunglasses so big they covered half her face, and her hair was styled perfectly, not a single strand out of place. Barbara was the newest and loudest voice on the HOA board, and everyone knew it. She smiled, but it wasn't a warm, friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made your stomach feel a little bit fluttery. "Alex, dear," she began, her voice smooth like honey but with a little bit of a sharp edge. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "It certainly is, Barbara," Alex replied, trying to be polite. He wiped a bit of dirt from his hand. "Yes, well," she continued, looking past him, straight at his beautiful blue bridge. "I was just doing my daily rounds, checking on the, shall we say, standards of our community." She paused, letting her eyes sweep over his yard, then back to the bridge. "That bridge of yours. It's charming." Alex felt a small spark of pride. "Thank you, I built it myself." "Yes, so I hear," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "However, the HOA has recently reviewed the guidelines for structures over natural waterways." She paused again, making sure Alex was listening carefully. "And it seems, Alex, that your little bridge, while charming, does not quite meet the new, stricter regulations." Alex frowned. "New regulations? I haven't seen anything about bridges." "Oh, it's all in the updated bylaws, dear. You must have missed the email." "We sent it out last week," Barbara explained, though Alex was sure he hadn't received any such email. "It's about water flow, you see. And aesthetics. Uniformity. We want a cohesive look for Willow Creek. And frankly, a bright blue, handmade bridge just doesn't quite fit the grand vision we have for our beautiful community." Alex felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "It's been here for years, Barbara. No one's ever had a problem with it. And it's just a footbridge." Barbara's smile didn't change, but her voice became a tiny bit colder. "Rules are rules, Alex. And they apply to everyone, regardless of how long something has been there. We are committed to upholding the highest standards of our property values, and sometimes that requires making difficult decisions for the greater good." She then shifted gears, talking about something else entirely, some new rules about lawn decorations, as if the bridge conversation was already over. Alex nodded along, but his mind was still stuck on the bridge. He tried to argue a little more, saying his bridge helped maintain the creek bed, that it was environmentally friendly, but Barbara just waved her hand dismissively. She said the HOA would send him an official letter. She drove off, leaving Alex feeling like a storm cloud had just rolled over his sunny day. The official letter arrived a few days later. It was thick and filled with a lot of fancy words, but the main message was clear: Alex's bridge had to go. It said it was non-compliant and an impediment to natural water flow, which Alex knew was nonsense. His bridge was perfectly safe and didn't block anything. He felt angry, but also confused. Why was this happening? He tried to talk to other neighbors, but they just shrugged, looking a bit scared of Barbara and the new HOA rules. They didn't want to get into trouble themselves. Alex even went to an HOA meeting, hoping to explain about his bridge, but Barbara and her friends on the board barely let him speak. They just read from the rulebook and voted. Alex tried everything. He offered to paint the bridge a different color. He offered to make it smaller. He even offered to show them engineering drawings to prove it was perfectly fine. Nothing worked. Barbara seemed set on this. It was like she enjoyed telling people what to do, especially about something that made them happy. Alex wondered why someone would want to take away something so harmless, something that brought joy to him and others. He thought about kindness and how simple acts of meanness could spread like weeds. He tried to remind himself to be empathetic, to understand why Barbara might be so strict, but it was hard when his own peaceful world felt like it was shrinking. Then came the final notice. It wasn't just a letter this time. It was a formal order, with a deadline. If the bridge wasn't gone by next Friday, the HOA would remove it themselves and charge Alex for the work. Alex felt a cold dread creep into his heart. His beautiful blue bridge, the one he had built with such care, the one Gus loved so much, was truly in danger. He felt helpless, watching his little piece of paradise threatened by someone who seemed to care more about rules than about people. He spent the next few days feeling sad and defeated, looking at his bridge, wondering what to do. Gus seemed to sense his sadness, nudging Alex's hand with his wet nose, looking up with big, worried eyes. The Friday arrived, sunny and bright, mocking Alex's heavy mood. He watched from his window, hoping they wouldn't come. But then, a large truck rumbled down the street. It wasn't a gentle sound. It was the sound of something big and unfeeling. A crew of workers, dressed in bright vests, got out. Barbara herself was there, standing tall and straight, pointing at the bridge. Alex saw her talking to the workers, her mouth moving, her expression firm. He watched in disbelief as they approached his creek, carrying tools. And then, it happened. With loud scrapes and bangs, the workers began to dismantle his bridge. They didn't care about the smooth wood, or the robin's egg blue paint. They didn't care that Alex had built it with his own hands. They pulled off the planks, one by one. The railing snapped. The sturdy supports were ripped from the ground. Each crash and splintering sound echoed in Alex's heart. Gus whimpered softly beside him, sensing the destruction. In what felt like no time at all, his beloved blue bridge was gone. Just a muddy, empty gap where it used to be. The workers loaded the pieces into their truck, and Barbara watched, a satisfied smirk on her face. She gave Alex's house a cold, victorious glance before getting back into her fancy car and driving away. Alex stood there, staring at the empty space. His heart ached, a deep, burning ache that was worse than any physical pain. His special little garden was now cut off. The creek seemed to flow a little faster, a little angrier, without its gentle crossing. The butterflies would have nowhere to land. The peace he once felt in his backyard was shattered, replaced by a raw, furious emptiness. He felt a sadness that turned quickly into a simmering rage. They had taken his bridge. They had destroyed something he loved, something harmless and good. And as he looked out at the now empty gap, a dangerous thought began to form in his mind. A thought about rules, about power, and about what happens when someone takes something precious away without a second thought. A thought about a very large lake, and a very large mansion, and the surprising way water can disappear. The emptiness where Alex's bridge once stood was a constant, aching reminder. Every morning, he'd step into his backyard with Gus, and his eyes would immediately go to the raw, muddy banks of the creek. It wasn't just a missing bridge, it felt like a missing piece of his soul. Gus would wander to the edge, sniff sadly, and then look up at Alex with questioning eyes, as if asking where their fun crossing had gone. Alex would just sigh, kneel down, and scratch Gus behind the ears, wishing he had an answer that didn't involve the cold, unfeeling hand of the HOA, especially Barbara. The rage inside Alex didn't cool down. It simmered, a low, persistent flame. He tried to focus on his garden, but even his vibrant flowers seemed a little dimmer without the blue bridge complementing them. He tried to be kind, as he always had been, but a sharp edge had crept into his thoughts. He found himself replaying the scene, Barbara's smug smile, the sound of splintering wood, the emptiness. He felt cheated, disrespected. He understood that rules were important for a community to function, but these rules, he believed, were being used like weapons, not tools for harmony. They were about power, not peace. One evening, as Alex was sitting on his porch, listening to the crickets chirp, his neighbor, Sarah, walked by with her dog, Buster. Sarah was a cheerful woman with bright, curious eyes, and she always had a kind word. She stopped at Alex's fence, her smile fading as she looked at the creek. "Oh, Alex," she said, her voice soft. "I'm so sorry about your bridge. It was truly beautiful. What a shame." Alex nodded, grateful for her empathy. "Thanks, Sarah. It's hard to look at." Sarah shook her head. "Barbara and her new HOA rules are just too much. My cousin, David, he lives a few streets over, and they just fined him for having a bird feeder that was too rustic." "A bird feeder? It's getting ridiculous." She lowered her voice a bit. "Honestly, everyone's walking on eggshells around here. People are afraid to do anything that might catch her eye." Alex looked at her. "Do you think anyone would stand up to her?" Sarah sighed, running a hand through her short, curly hair. "I don't know, Alex. She's got a lot of power now. And she seems to enjoy using it. It's a shame, because this used to be such a friendly place. Now, it feels like everyone's just trying to fly under the radar." She paused, then added, "It's funny, too, because before she was on the board, she always complained about how strict the old HOA was. Said they didn't care about people. Now look." Her words echoed Alex's own thoughts. It was a clear case of someone getting a little bit of power and letting it go to their head. The conversation ended with Sarah wishing him well and walking off, leaving Alex alone with his thoughts. He realized that this wasn't just about his bridge, it was about the spirit of the entire neighborhood. He believed in fairness, in treating others with respect, and in building a community where everyone felt safe and valued. Barbara, he felt, was dismantling that, one non-compliant item at a time. A few days later, Alex decided he couldn't just sit and stew. He needed to do something. Not just for himself, but for the quiet frustration he saw in his neighbor's eyes. He started by calling around, trying to find out if there was anything he could do legally. He spent hours on the phone with lawyers, trying to understand the HOA bylaws. But every lawyer told him the same thing, because Barbara and her board had followed the rules, even if they were mean-spirited, Alex didn't have much of a case. They had given him notice, even if he felt it was unfair. They had voted. It was all by the book, even when it felt so wrong. He felt the frustration build, a heavy weight in his chest. He looked at the empty space where his bridge had been. He remembered Barbara's triumphant smirk. A wild, almost crazy idea began to sprout in his mind. It was a risky idea, a daring idea, an idea that seemed too big, too difficult, too impossible. But the more he thought about it, the more it felt like the only way to truly make his point. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about showing that kindness matters, that empathy is important, and that you can't just bully people without consequences. It was about making Barbara understand, in a way she couldn't ignore, that her actions had a huge impact on others. Alex knew that Barbara loved her lakeside property more than anything. She often hosted lavish parties, showing off her magnificent views, her private dock, her fancy speedboats. The lake was the crown jewel of her $8 million estate. Without the lake, her mansion was just a very big house. And that's when the truly extreme thought took root. He remembered reading somewhere, years ago, about the way some of the older lakes in the area were built. He remembered an old town map he'd seen once that showed the path of the original, smaller streams before the big lake was created. He remembered seeing a small, old, almost hidden structure, like a tiny building, off in a wooded area way past his property, near where his creek joined the larger stream before it fed into the main lake. He had always wondered what it was, but never paid much attention. Now, he thought about it differently. He remembered a faint metal sound he'd once heard coming from inside that structure during a particularly heavy rainstorm years ago, a sound like something opening or closing. He started doing some research, quiet, secret research. He visited the local library, poring over old maps and historical records of the Willow Creek development. He spent hours online, reading about dams and flood control systems. He even hiked through the thick woods behind his house, pretending to be looking for rare birds, but really searching for that forgotten structure. It was overgrown with vines and almost completely hidden, but it was there. And inside, barely visible through a rusty metal grate, he thought he saw something that looked like a very old, very large valve. His heart pounded when he realized what it was. This wasn't just a random structure, it was an old control gate, part of the original water management system for the area, long forgotten by most. A system that could, potentially, divert the water, or even drain it. He remembered a story his grandfather used to tell, about how the Willow Creek area was once prone to flooding, and how engineers had built a clever system to manage the water, including a way to reduce the lake's level if needed. He had dismissed it as an old tale, but now, seeing this structure, he wondered. It was a massive, daunting undertaking, one that would require immense effort and knowledge, but the more he thought about Barbara's actions, the more determined he became. He realized what he had to do. If she could take away his small, beloved bridge, he could, perhaps, take away her most prized possession, the very water that made her $8 million mansion so grand. It was a wild, desperate plan, but the image of her shocked face, staring at a muddy lakebed, filled him with a fierce resolve. He started gathering tools, not gardening tools this time, but heavier, stranger ones. He worked in secret, late at night, when no one could see him, making trips into the woods, clearing away the overgrown brush around the mysterious structure. He felt a shiver of fear, mixed with a growing sense of power. This wasn't about being mean like Barbara. This was about a lesson. A very big, very muddy lesson. He wouldn't let them find out how it happened. He would make his statement, and then let the consequences unfold, hoping that somewhere in the muddy chaos, a lesson about respect and kindness would finally take root. He began to plan, step by careful step, how to open that ancient valve, how to slowly, subtly, start to drain the heart of Barbara's precious lakeside view. The sun set, casting long, dark shadows over the empty space where his bridge had been, and a new, daring resolve settled in Alex's heart. He was going to drain the lake. The following days were a blur of intense, secret work for Alex. Every spare moment, especially after dark, he was out in the dense woods, making his way to the hidden valve house. Gus, loyal as ever, would pad quietly beside him, his nose sniffing the night air, seemingly understanding the seriousness of their nightly missions. Alex had acquired a heavy-duty flashlight, a set of old, rusty tools he'd found buried in his grandfather's shed, and a deep, burning motivation. The valve house itself was a crumbling, stone structure, almost completely consumed by vines and thick underbrush. It felt like something out of an old adventure book, forgotten by time. The air inside was damp and smelled of earth and rust. The large, iron valve he had spotted was indeed there, solid and ancient. It was connected to an equally old system of thick pipes that disappeared into the ground. He realized this valve controlled a crucial diversion point for the main stream that fed the lake. Turning it, he understood from his research, wouldn't drain the lake overnight, but it would significantly reduce the amount of fresh water flowing into it. Over time, combined with the natural evaporation, the lake level would drop, revealing its muddy secrets. His first challenge was simply getting the valve to move. It was rusted stuck, as if it hadn't been touched in decades. Alex grunted and strained, pushing and pulling with all his might. The metal was cold and unyielding. He tried oiling it with a rusty can of WD-40 he'd brought along, letting it soak into the joints. He hammered gently, then not so gently, on the wheel with a rubber mallet, trying to loosen the ancient grip of time and rust. For hours, he worked, muscles aching, sweat stinging his eyes. Gus would lie patiently nearby, occasionally letting out a soft whine of encouragement. Finally, late one night, after almost a week of trying, there was a faint, scraping groan. Alex pushed again, gritting his teeth, and with a terrible screech that echoed through the silent woods, the large iron will began to turn, just a tiny bit. Alex almost shouted with triumph. It was moving. He kept at it, a few turns each night, slowly, painstakingly. Each turn was a victory, a small act of defiance against Barbara and her endless rules. He knew he was doing something drastic, something that would cause a huge stir, but the memory of his splintered bridge and Barbara's triumphant look fueled his resolve. He wasn't doing this to destroy, he told himself, but to make a point. A very, very clear point about what happens when you crush someone's spirit and ignore basic human kindness. While Alex was busy with his secret project, life in Willow Creek continued, though with a growing undercurrent of tension. The HOA, now firmly under Barbara's sway, seemed to be everywhere. More and more letters arrived in mailboxes, not just Alex's. Sarah's dog house was declared not uniform with the architectural style of the neighborhood. Old Mr. Henderson, who had lived in his house for 50 years, was told his rose bushes were too unruly and blocked the sidewalk, even though they had never bothered anyone. The community notice board, once used for lost cats and bake sale announcements, was now covered with stern warnings about fines for infractions ranging from unapproved paint colors to leaving garbage bins out too early. People started to grumble, quietly at first. You'd hear whispers at the grocery store, hushed conversations by the mailboxes. Did you hear what they did to the Miller's porch swing? Can you believe the fine they gave the Johnsons for their garden gnome? The friendly waves from neighbors became more hesitant, their smiles a little tighter. People began to avoid eye contact, worried that speaking up might make them the next target. The spirit of kindness and helpfulness that Alex so valued in Willow Creek felt like it was slowly being choked. It was a low point for the neighborhood, a time when fear was starting to outweigh friendship. Alex noticed it too. He saw Sarah looking stressed, pushing Buster's doghouse a few feet back from the sidewalk, even though it looked perfectly fine where it was. He saw Mr. Henderson sadly pruning his beloved rose bushes down to stumps, losing their vibrant color. These smaller, less extreme events only hardened Alex's resolve. This wasn't just about his bridge anymore. It was about standing up for the entire community, even if he had to do it in a very unconventional and secret way. He believed that if someone took extreme measures to be unkind, sometimes an extreme, but non-harmful, response was needed to shake things up and make people truly see. One afternoon, new, extreme event hit close to home, stirring the pot even further. A big, fancy, newly installed sign appeared at the main entrance to Willow Creek, right by the stone wall that welcomed everyone to the neighborhood. It was a huge, elaborate sign, much bigger than the old, simple one. It listed a new set of community guidelines, in bold, unfriendly letters. Things like, strict adherence to lawn height, maximum 3 inches, and, no visible outdoor children's toys, even though many families with young kids lived there. But the most shocking new rule, the one that made everyone gasp, was about pets. All outdoor pet enclosures, including dog runs and cat fences, are strictly prohibited. All pets must be kept indoors unless on a leash and accompanied by an owner. This was a bombshell. So many families in Willow Creek had beloved pets who enjoyed safe, outdoor spaces. Alex himself had a small, enclosed area for Gus where he could sunbathe safely when Alex was inside. Sarah had built a lovely, sturdy dog run for Buster. Old Mrs. Rodriguez had a secure catio for her elderly cat, Mittens. This new rule felt personal, cruel even, to many. It wasn't about property values, it was about control, and it was deeply unpopular. It felt like a direct attack on people's freedom and their love for their animals. The next day, Alex saw Sarah on her front lawn, tears streaming down her face as she looked at Buster's dog run. She had a notice from the HOA, giving her only 3 days to remove it or face a massive fine. Buster, sensing her distress, nudged her hand gently. Across the street, Mrs. Rodriguez was hugging Mittens tightly, her face pale. Alex felt a surge of cold fury. This wasn't right. This wasn't how a community should treat its members. This was an extreme, heartless act by a power-hungry board. Seeing the distress of his neighbors solidified Alex's decision. He realized that Barbara wasn't just targeting him. She was slowly, systematically, trying to control every aspect of everyone's lives in Willow Creek. The pet rule was the last straw for many. This wasn't just about a bridge anymore. It was about fighting for the soul of their neighborhood, for the simple joys and freedoms that made life worth living. He knew his secret plan was now more important than ever. He had to keep going. He had to make Barbara and her HOA understand the consequences of their actions, not just for him, but for everyone. He returned to the Valve house that night, the anger and sadness driving him forward, twisting the ancient wheel with renewed determination. The silent, steady draining of the lake was now not just revenge for his bridge, but a quiet, powerful protest for every silenced neighbor, every ruined rose bush, and every threatened pet. The lake would continue to drop, and soon, very soon, someone would notice. And that would be the beginning of a very big, very public problem for Barbara. The slow, silent draining of Willow Creek Lake continued day and night, a hidden countdown to what Alex knew would be an explosion of chaos. Each night, he would slip into the woods, the air growing cooler as summer evenings stretched on, and turn the ancient valve a few more precious clicks. The rusted metal grated less now, a testament to his consistent effort. He imagined the water in the lake receding centimeter by centimeter, almost like watching an hourglass empty, only much, much slower. He felt a strange mix of nervousness and fierce satisfaction. He wasn't harming anyone, not really. He was just showing Barbara that actions have consequences, that kindness and empathy were not just suggestions, but essential parts of a thriving community. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in Willow Creek grew thicker with discontent. The new HOA rules were like a tight net, pulling tighter around everyone. People were getting fined for the smallest things. Mrs. Gable, who always had the prettiest holiday lights, got a notice saying her festive display was excessive and a visual nuisance. Young Billy Davis, who loved to play basketball in his driveway, had his hoop removed by an HOA crew because it was not a permanent fixture and detracted from property aesthetics. His parents, usually so calm, were furious but felt powerless. The joyous sounds of children playing were replaced by a quiet, almost fearful silence. The neighborhood began to feel less like a home and more like a very strict, very expensive boarding school. Alex often saw people whispering in their driveways, furtively looking around as if afraid of being caught. He heard snippets of conversations about Barbara, about how she seemed to delight in finding new ways to control everyone. He saw the tired, resigned looks on his neighbors' faces. This continuous stream of less extreme, but deeply irritating, events kept the fire of his resolve burning. He thought about the empathy he wished Barbara would show, how a true leader cared for the well-being and happiness of all, not just the perfection of appearances. He believed that a community thrives on connection, not control, and Barbara was systematically destroying that connection. Then came the first sign that Alex's secret plan was starting to work, a less extreme event that was just a tiny ripple before the tidal wave. It was a Saturday morning, usually a time when the lake was bustling with activity. Families would take out their small boats, kids would try to catch fish from the docks, and the quiet whir of distant jet skis would fill the air. But this particular Saturday was different. A few worried murmurs started spreading. Has anyone else noticed the water level? Old Mr. Peterson asked Alex as they both checked their mailboxes. Mr. Peterson had lived in Willow Creek for decades and knew the lake intimately. Alex tried to act casual. Oh, really? I hadn't paid much attention. Mr. Peterson shook his head. It's lower, Alex. Definitely lower. My small fishing boat is scraping the bottom near the dock. Never happened before, not like this. Another neighbor, Brenda, walked by, pushing her stroller. Oh, I noticed that too. My kids tried to swim off the shallow part yesterday, and it felt squishier than usual. Like the mud on the bottom was closer. These were just casual observations, easily dismissed by most. No one was panicking yet. The weather had been a bit dry lately, and some people blamed the lack of rain. But Alex knew the truth. The valve was working. The water was receding. The whispers were growing louder, but still just whispers. He felt a surge of fear mixed with a strange kind of excitement. The plan was truly unfolding. He knew he had to keep pushing, keep turning that valve, until the message was clear enough for even Barbara to see. The calm before the storm, however, was about to break. A truly extreme event was on the horizon, one that would make it impossible for anyone to ignore what was happening to the lake. It was the annual Willow Creek Regatta, a big boat race and community party that Barbara herself had championed and organized. She loved to be the center of attention, especially at fancy events. This year, she had promised it would be the grandest regatta ever, even hiring a local news crew to cover it. Everyone was excited for the race, for the barbecue, for a chance to forget the oppressive HOA rules for a day. The morning of the regatta dawned bright and sunny, almost too perfect. Colorful flags fluttered from lampposts, a giant bouncy castle was inflated in the park, and the air smelled of grilled hot dogs. People started arriving at the lakefront early, dressed in their summer clothes, carrying picnic baskets. Barbara, looking regal in a crisp white captain's hat, was already by the main dock, directing everything with a megaphone. Her $8 million mansion, decked out with streamers, overlooked the entire scene, appearing even grander against the backdrop of the sparkling water. The main event was the boat race, featuring many of the smaller, private boats from the community. Barbara's own sleek, expensive speed boat was moored proudly at the main dock, ready to lead the parade. At precisely 11 a.m., the horn sounded, signaling the start of the regatta. The smaller boats, piloted by various neighbors, began to motor out from their docks, heading towards the starting line marked by buoys in the middle of the lake. But then, a terrible sound ripped through the festive atmosphere. Not the sound of an engine, but a horrible, grinding, scraping noise. One of the first boats out, a cheerful little sailboat owned by the O'Connell family, suddenly shuddered to a halt. Its keel, the long fin at the bottom of the boat, was stuck. It was caught on something invisible beneath the surface. The O'Connell dad, Bill, looked puzzled, then alarmed, as he tried to free it, but the boat wouldn't budge. Then another boat, a small motorboat driven by David, Sarah's cousin, also slowed down, its propeller churning mud instead of water. Panic began to spread. People looked at each other, confused. What was happening? Barbara, still holding her megaphone, started shouting. What's going on out there? Keep moving. The race has started. But the boats weren't moving. More and more of them were getting stuck, their keels or propellers hitting the newly exposed lakebed. The water level was so low that parts of the lake that were usually deep enough for boats were now dangerously shallow, filled with hidden rocks and thick mud. The race was a disaster. It couldn't continue. The beautiful, sparkling lake, which everyone thought was deep and clear, was revealing its ugly, muddy secrets. The crowd on shore gasped. Kids, who had been laughing moments before, pointed, their smiles gone. The news crew, instead of filming the race, was now filming the stranded boats and the rapidly shrinking water line, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. Barbara's face, usually so composed, turned bright red. Her jaw dropped as she looked out at her ruined regatta, at the lake that was clearly, undeniably, shrinking before everyone's eyes. This was the moment. The extreme event. The moment when everyone in Willow Creek would know that something was terribly, terribly wrong with their beloved lake, and no amount of blaming the weather would explain it away. Alex watched from a distance, hidden by a crowd of stunned neighbors, his heart pounding, knowing that his quiet act had just become a very public, very undeniable phenomenon. Panic rippled through the crowd gathered for the regatta. The joyous atmosphere shattered, replaced by a confused murmur that quickly grew into shouts of disbelief. Boats were not just stuck. Some were beginning to tilt at alarming angles as the water continued its relentless retreat, exposing more of the mucky, rock-strewn lakebed. Children, who had been excited for the race, now pointed with wide eyes at the sinking vessels, their innocent fun replaced by a sense of unease. Barbara, still by the main dock, her face a mask of scarlet fury, screamed into her megaphone, demanding answers, but no one had them. The news crew, instead of capturing picturesque moments of community fun, were now filming the unfolding disaster, their cameras zooming in on the stranded boats and the rapidly shrinking shoreline around Barbara's majestic mansion. The sight of her own expensive speedboat now resting on a patch of wet mud, its sleek hull looking ridiculously out of place, seemed to push Barbara over the edge. Her previous arrogance crumbled into sheer disbelief. "What is happening?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. She paced frantically, gesturing wildly at the receding water. People started to gather in small groups, their whispers turning into louder questions. "Is it a drought? Did someone open a dam? How could this happen so fast?" The once vibrant blue of the lake was now replaced by vast stretches of dark, slimy mud, smelling faintly of decay. The beauty of Willow Creek's centerpiece was gone, replaced by an ugly, barren landscape. This was the ultimate high, the dramatic reveal Alex had secretly orchestrated. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. The stranded boat owners had to carefully wade through the thick, sucking mud to reach their boats and assess the damage. It was a slow, messy, and frustrating process. The bouncy castle deflated, its colorful plastic sinking sadly into the grass. The barbecue pits sat unused. The entire regatta, Barbara's crowning glory, had become a complete and utter failure, a public spectacle of the worst kind. Barbara herself, usually so composed, looked utterly undone. She kept yelling at people, then at her phone, then at nothing in particular, her voice hoarse with anger and confusion. No one could explain why the lake was disappearing, and that mystery fueled the growing unease. Over the next few days, the initial shock gave way to a wave of collective outrage. The lake continued to drop, revealing more and more of its secrets. Old tires, rusty bicycles, and even a sunken picnic table emerged from the murky depths, turning the once pristine body of water into a giant, muddy junkyard. The smell, a mix of damp earth and stagnant water, permeated the air, replacing the sweet scent of summer flowers. Flies buzzed in thick clouds over the exposed mud. The impact was immediate and widespread, affecting every single person in Willow Creek. The property values of all the lakeside homes, especially Barbara's, plummeted. Real estate agents were suddenly very quiet. Houses that were once considered prime locations were now sitting by a muddy pit, making them almost impossible to sell. Children couldn't swim or play by the water's edge. The beautiful views were ruined. The fishing boats, the kayaks, the jet skis, they were all useless, stuck high and dry or submerged in mud. This was a major low for the entire community, a widespread consequence that touched everyone's lives. The frustration of the ruined regatta was now compounded by a deep sense of loss and betrayal. People didn't know who or what to blame, but they were desperate for answers. HOA meetings, once sparsely attended, were now packed. Everyone wanted to know why the lake was disappearing and what Barbara, as the head of the HOA, was going to do about it. But Barbara, usually so quick with rules and solutions for everyone else, had no answers. She stammered, blamed unforeseen geological shifts, and even tried to suggest it was a natural phenomenon, but no one believed her. The sheer scale of the disappearing water was too enormous to be a mere act of nature. The pressure on Barbara intensified dramatically. Neighbors, usually afraid to speak up, now found their voices, emboldened by their shared misery. Sarah, her face grim, spoke up at one meeting, pointing out that Barbara had been so quick to fine people for minor infractions, but was utterly helpless when facing a real disaster. Mr. Henderson, whose beloved roses had been chopped down, simply looked at Barbara with a sad, knowing expression. The quiet resentment that had been building against Barbara and her strict rules now erupted into open anger. People felt that if she cared so much about property values and community aesthetics, why wasn't she doing anything about this enormous, stinking, muddy hole where their beautiful lake used to be? Rumors began to fly around the neighborhood. Some whispered about a secret underground spring drying up. Others talked about a broken pipe somewhere far away. Nobody, however, suspected Alex. He moved through the chaos, looking just as concerned and confused as everyone else. He listened to the theories, offered sympathetic nods, and continued his nightly visits to the old valve house, making sure the flow was still diverted. He felt the weight of his actions, but also a growing sense that this huge, undeniable problem might just be the thing that finally broke Barbara's iron grip on the community. Then, a new, extreme event unfolded, bringing the crisis even closer to Barbara's doorstep. For days, her $8 million mansion, which had always boasted the most breathtaking lakeside views, was now overlooking a vast, putrid expanse of mud. The smell was getting worse, and the sight was unbearable. Barbara, who loved to sit on her grand patio with a cup of tea, now found herself staring at a wasteland. Her perfectly manicured lawn, which used to gently slope into the lake, now ended abruptly at a steep, muddy drop-off, a dangerous cliff leading to the exposed lakebed. One afternoon, as Barbara was entertaining some very important, very wealthy friends from out of town, showing them her magnificent, now lakeside-less, home, something terrible happened. She was leading them towards her private dock, which now stood forlornly on stilts in the middle of the dried-up lakebed. She wanted to show them where the water used to be, trying to put a brave face on the disaster. But as they approached, the ground beneath them, near the edge of her property where the lakebed began, gave way. Not a huge collapse, but a significant, slumping shift. One of her friends, a rather plump woman named Penelope, gasped and stumbled, almost falling into the thick, gooey mud below. Barbara herself stumbled, catching herself just in time. A section of her perfectly landscaped lawn, right near the edge of the now exposed lakebed, began to crack and slide, a slow, terrifying landslide of sod and decorative rocks into the mucky pit. The very ground around her precious mansion was literally crumbling, unable to hold its shape without the supportive pressure of the lake water. It was a visible, tangible sign that the drying lake was directly impacting her property, making it unstable and potentially dangerous. Penelope shrieked, covered in mud and fright. Barbara's face, already red from stress, turned ghostly white. Her $8 million mansion, her pride and joy, was now not only unsightly but potentially unsafe. The direct threat to her property, her wealth, and her carefully crafted image was now undeniable. She wasn't just dealing with a ruined regatta or angry neighbors, her own foundation was literally shaking. The fear in her eyes was palpable, and Alex, watching from a short distance, felt a cold satisfaction. The message, he knew, was getting through, loud and clear. The crumbling edge of Barbara's lawn was the final, terrifying straw. Her wealthy friends, covered in mud and clearly horrified, quickly made their excuses and fled, leaving Barbara alone to stare at the collapsing earth. Her face, usually so composed and stern, was a mask of utter despair. The $8 million mansion, once her symbol of power and perfection, was now a precarious edifice overlooking a stinking, muddy wasteland, its very foundations threatened. The fear in her eyes was not just for her property, it was for her carefully constructed world, which was now visibly falling apart. This was a direct, undeniable blow, and it pushed her to the brink. The next few days in Willow Creek were a whirlwind of panic and accusations. The news crews, initially just there for the regatta, now swarmed the neighborhood, broadcasting live reports about the mysteriously disappearing lake. Experts from universities and environmental agencies arrived, scratching their heads, offering complicated theories about sinkholes and geological anomalies. No one, not even the smartest scientists, could figure out why the massive body of water was just vanishing. They tested the remaining water, examined the exposed lakebed, but found no obvious cause. The mystery deepened, fueling a desperate search for answers. Barbara, meanwhile, was in a complete meltdown. Her phone rang constantly with calls from her insurance company, her bank, and furious neighbors demanding explanations. She tried to organize emergency meetings, but people just yelled at her, accusing her of caring more about banning bird feeders than saving their homes. The power she had so eagerly sought and wielded had turned into a heavy burden of blame and panic. She saw her life's masterpiece, her grand home, becoming a useless shell, a constant reminder of the disaster unfolding around her. She was consumed by fear, a feeling she had rarely experienced and had certainly never inflicted upon herself. Amidst the chaos, Alex remained outwardly calm, though a quiet intensity buzzed beneath his surface. He continued his nightly trips to the valve, ensuring the lake kept shrinking. He watched Barbara from afar, seeing the despair etched on her face, and felt no joy. Instead, a strange sense of empathy stirred within him. He saw a woman utterly lost, stripped of her control and pride. He had wanted her to understand the impact of her actions, to feel what it was like to have something precious taken away. And now, she was feeling it, tenfold. His goal was never to cause permanent destruction, but to deliver a harsh, undeniable lesson. The extreme events had done their job. The neighborhood was in an uproar, the HOA was in disarray, and Barbara was utterly broken. Then came the moment for the next, less extreme, turn of events, a chance for a different kind of impact. Alex decided it was time to change strategy. He didn't want to leave the community in permanent disarray. His purpose was to bring about understanding, not ruin. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Alex decided to pay Barbara a visit. He walked slowly, Gus trotting calmly beside him. He found her on her grand patio, which now overlooked a vast expanse of muddy, cracked earth. She was sitting alone, her shoulders slumped, staring blankly at the disaster that was once her magnificent view. She looked small, defeated, completely unlike the formidable HOA Karen everyone knew. Alex approached cautiously. "Barbara," he said softly. She jumped, startled, her eyes wide and red-rimmed. "Alex? What do you want?" Her voice was thin, devoid of its usual sharpness. I wanted to see if you were okay," Alex replied, his voice gentle. "This is a terrible situation." Barbara scoffed, a bitter sound. "Okay? My house is sinking. My life is ruined. My reputation is gone. Do I look okay?" Alex sat down on a nearby patio chair, which was surprisingly dusty. "No, you don't. And I'm truly sorry for that. But Barbara, do you remember my bridge?" She looked at him, confused. "Your bridge? What does that have to do with anything? We took it down. It was against the rules." "Yes," Alex said, his voice quiet but firm. "You took it down. Something I built with my own hands, something that brought me joy, something harmless. You took it without a second thought for how it would make me feel. You used rules like weapons." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And you did the same to Sarah's dog house, and Mr. Henderson's roses, and Billy's basketball hoop. You squeezed the joy and kindness out of this neighborhood, one rule at a time." Barbara stared at him, her eyes widening as a terrible understanding began to dawn. Are you saying?" Alex shook his head. I'm saying that actions have consequences, Barbara. When you hurt people, when you take away their joy, when you abuse your power, there's a reaction. Sometimes, that reaction is big. And sometimes, it's a direct reflection of the pain you caused. He looked around at the devastated lakebed, then back at her. You wanted to show everyone who was boss. You wanted perfection, no matter the cost to others. And now, you're seeing the true cost. Tears welled up in Barbara's eyes, not tears of anger, but of a profound, raw sadness. You did this, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alex didn't confirm, didn't deny. He just looked at her with a steady, compassionate gaze. I want this community to be kind again, Barbara. I want people to care about each other, not just about rules. I want us to remember what really matters. Barbara was silent for a long moment, staring at the muddy abyss. She seemed to shrink in her chair, the imposing, Karen persona completely gone. She truly saw the devastation now, not just as a financial loss, but as a direct result of her own behavior. This was the first time Alex had ever seen her truly vulnerable, truly empathetic. And then, a wild thought, an extreme ending, exploded into Alex's mind. A way to not just end the current crisis but to change the very heart of Willow Creek, to rebuild it on foundations of genuine kindness and community spirit. It was risky, daring, and involved a huge leap of faith, but it was the only way to truly deliver on the inspiring message he felt was so important. He looked at Barbara, then at the vast, empty lakebed. Barbara, he said, his voice gaining a new, hopeful tone, there's a way to fix this. Not just the lake, but everything. We can bring the water back. But it's going to take everyone. It's going to take trust, and kindness, and working together, not against each other. It's going to take you, and me, and everyone in this community, making a choice to be better. Barbara looked up, a flicker of something new in her eyes, not anger, but a desperate, fragile hope. How? She whispered. Alex stood up, looking out at the ruined landscape, then back at the woman who had caused so much pain but was now herself hurting. I know how to bring the lake back, he said, his voice ringing with quiet confidence. But only if we can truly start over. No more bullying, no more petty rules. Just real community. And you, Barbara, you have to be the one to lead that change. Not with rules, but with understanding. We drain the lake when we drain empathy from our hearts. We refill it when we let kindness flow back in. Are you ready to rebuild, not just a lake, but a real home for all of us? The silence stretched, broken only by the chirping of crickets. Barbara stared at the desolate lakebed, then at Alex, her eyes searching for a hint of trickery. But she saw only earnestness, a genuine desire for peace. After what felt like an eternity, she finally nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It was a silent, desperate promise. And Alex knew, in that moment, that the wild ride of the lake, from its disappearance to its potential return, was finally ready for its most amazing chapter yet. The community would be stunned, then hopefully, transformed.